Blog Talk Radio.
Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys in the Bible right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. I am William Bell, and it is a delight to be with you on this evening. But along with me is my illustrious co-host, Dr. Don K. Preston. And we hope that he's going to be okay tonight, but he's been struggling a little bit with his voice, as we were talking about just before the broadcast. But it's a great day, and beautiful outside, a little warm, and we're looking forward to another great study with you. Let's see if we can get him to say a little bit without doing much damage to his vocal cords. Don, how are you, and what's going on with you, and what do you got to say to us tonight relative to the happenings out your way?
Yeah, well, as I was saying before we came on the air, for some reason or other, I don't know why, today's not been a good day for my voice. It's been extremely weak and very, very raspy. I've coughed a lot today at different times, and so I don't know what's going on. I mean, it's been this way ever since I had strep throat almost 6 weeks ago now. And so I literally don't know why in the world I can't seem to get the full strength of my voice back. It looks like I'm going to have to be making a return trip. William, can you hear me? I'm all of a sudden getting tons of static.
Okay, yes, I can hear you very well. You're coming in loud and clear, and I don't hear any static. Let me check and see if it's something in my background that could be a problem. Okay.
All right. But anyway, it's been a very, very hectic, very busy week for me, through correspondence, emails, and what have you. Just so many wonderful emails from people literally all around the world, and of people that are coming to understand covenant eschatology, people that are excited, some continuing debate with folks on Facebook who oppose covenant eschatology, and who just continued, as William and I were talking just before we came on the air. It really is astounding, the desperation that you encounter from those who oppose covenant eschatology. I'm not going to call any names, but there's a Facebook page devoted to supposedly refuting covenant eschatology. Of course, the interesting thing about it is they keep losing members. They've never even reached 200 people, and I can tell you this: an awful lot of the people who are on that page are actually they're actually full preterists who just simply go over there to how should I put this? Just to have some fun, interacting with those who oppose covenant eschatology and refuting them. But there are a couple of hardcore anti-preterists on there who seem to think that they're God's gift to the world of theology, when in reality they really expose their own ignorance and their own desperation in their comments, and it's literally laughable. And William knows exactly what I'm talking about when when you read day after day the comments of these individuals who are trying to make a point, any kind of a point of covenant eschatology. One guy posted just today. He's a Church of Christ minister, and boy, I guess he thought he had a point, William. He posted a little hit piece about God cursing the ground, and by the way, he was actually trying to avoid the reality that God had cursed Adam and Eve. He was saying it wasn't Adam that God cursed, it was the ground. And I'm going, so in other words, the ground bore the brunt of God's wrath, not Adam and Eve. It was just purely coincidental. No big thing, no issue at all that Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden. No, nothing to see here in regard to God saying, "In the day you eat, you will surely die." I mean, after all, they didn't die, so they weren't cursed. I mean, the desperation that is so manifest, in this kind of quote argumentation. I don't even know that it rises to the level of argumentation. I'll be really honest. Argumentation is supposed to have a point. It's supposed to have some point of validity to it that is, to use the term, probative. That is, it's supposed to prove something. And so when you get on there and you say that Adam and Eve were not actually cursed, number one, and the reason I'm saying this is because all of the people on that board are constantly appealing to church history, church tradition. What has the church always believed? So here's a guy making the argument, it wasn't Adam and Eve that were cursed after all, it was the ground. And so for maybe the very first time in history, you have somebody denying that Adam and Eve were actually cursed by God because of their sin. Instead, the ground was cursed. So it must have been the ground that sinned. I don't know, William. How do you make head or tail of things like that?
I have no idea. It's just, a continual loop of nonsense, really, that goes on. And these guys, they try. They think they're, as you were saying, the greatest exegetes in the world. They can't be contested or refuted from their perspective. And they just assume that with a bit of arrogance in terms of the way they approach things. And, they just come with this assumed, I know that I'm right. I know that preterism is wrong. And, all we have to do is say this and look how easily it's dismissed. And yet, as you say, they get themselves into this trouble and traps every single time. And then go off and you don't hear anything from them. And I'm still waiting on those lab samples, which I have not received.
Yeah.
But that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, it truly is amazing. And I told Jan a week or so ago, and I was doing more. I was just doing more auditing of the site than I was anything because I felt so bad. But I was reading some of the comments, and I told Jan, I said, the more I read how desperate, I keep using that term, but I don't know of a better term, but how illogical and how unscriptural the arguments are that keep coming from these people, the more it confirms that that we are in fact on the right road, that we really do have the truth. I mean, when you literally have to make up brand spanking new arguments that have never been known in the history of Christianity, and you just throw it out there, or when you throw arguments out there that that come back to bite you in such an incredible way, and when you're caught in these incredible self-contradictions. And the contradictions are right there. They're in front of your face, and it's pointed out to you. And instead of saying, well, I was obviously wrong in that, I'm going to have to rethink or whatever, they double down on it and say, this is not my problem, it's yours. It is like, well, excuse me, it's not my problem when you're the one who said it. And I pointed that out some today about this individual who tried to make it appear as if I was the one that had said something, when in reality it was him. And I kept pointing out, I said, look, these are not my words. They are your words. And it's your words that are entrapping you. So I said, don't try to project your words onto me when it's your own words that are entrapping you. It just will not work. So he naturally just changed the subject and started talking about something totally different, totally ignored, what I had to say. And that's what happens day after day after day on the part of these individuals. They just they cannot make an argument without entrapping themselves. And when you point it out, then they turn hostile and belligerent and mean. And it's not just them. I can point out a number of different people on YouTube that have come on. They have attacked me. They've called me. Goodness gracious, the names that they have called me. And yet, when you keep pointing out and when you keep proving beyond a shadow of doubt that their own words are what are entrapping them, they just turn hostile. They just simply do not know what to say. So anyway, it's really amazing.
Yes, it is. And, I guess it will continue as long as they, feel that this is an easy game for them. But, the embarrassment will go on and the contradictions will go on. And as you say, the numbers over there are dwindling. They've never been very high at all. And a large portion of them probably make up full preterists to begin with. So, because really, it's about a handful. Maybe you can count them on, your 10 fingers in terms of what's going on over there, particularly the ones who are vocal and, who really write and respond. So it's not that many, when you think about it. And when you look at the number of people that have embraced the full preterist view and who are, who may not ever go to that page and raise issues, but yet are, declaring the message all over on their own platforms and on other platforms. It's just really, really amazing to see. And that just shows how ineffective their opposition because, they just actually make it shine even more because, as you say, when they are making these arguments that are, lacking in reason and logic, and they get exposed, then other people see through them. And when they see through them, they either join the fight or they, abandon, especially if they were thinking that, those men had some kind of validity to them. They see that exposed and then they want, nothing else to do with them. So,
and of course, there's the other aspect of that too. When people that have any degree of decorum to them and any sense of sensibility and proper forms of controversy, Paul wrote to Timothy and he said, the child of God must not strive, but be gentle to all men in meekness, instructing those who oppose themselves. And as I pointed out on that board 100 times or more, What happens on that board every single day is they know and they see, they realize they cannot answer the arguments. And so what do? They start calling names. They use some of the most horrible language. And these are people that are supposed to be Christians. And I finally blocked some of them because of their ungodly behavior. And I just I'm just blown away. You and I have talked about this on countless occasions. I am just absolutely blown away that people who call themselves Christians believe that it's okay to be so ugly, to be so hateful, vitriolic, and just pick your adjective of the way they treat those of us who are the only people in the world, by the way, who are defending the integrity of Scripture and the fact that Christ kept His word. They are the ones who say Christ failed. They are the ones who preach and proclaim a failed Messiah. And yet we're the heretics. So I think happens a lot. I think it's one of the reasons for the decreasing membership on that board is I think that people who may have an interest in hearing the other side of the story, so to speak, they get on there and they read these ugly, hateful, caustic posts by these anti-preterists. And all of the name-calling and judgmental attitudes. And it's like, well, if they don't have anything other than this to try to defeat preterism, then there must be something to preterism, because calling someone a name is not an argument. Having an insulting demeanor doesn't refute anything. Ridicule is not refutation, as I have read or as I have posted on many, many different occasions. But, I mean, as I've also said on many occasions, when ridicule is all that you got, when you don't have actual exegetical arguments, then guess what? You get ugly. You know, William, you know, there's this old joke. It's a preacher's joke about this preacher making out his outline, and he's going down through his outline, you know, and on this one particular point out in the margin, he's got it marked, and it says, "Weak point, get loud." And evidently, these fellows have their outlines, and in their outlines, on every point they're making, it says, "Weak point, get ugly. Weak point, get loud." And it just happens. A good one. Yeah, I thought you had heard that, for crying out loud.
I really hadn't. Yeah, I'm not quite that old, Don.
Oh, now come on. Let's just not go down that road. Okay, all right, whatever. Well, moving right along here, need to get back to our study of the Messianic Temple. And my voice is not getting any better. In fact, I'm going to have to step away from the microphone here just a little bit and go get myself a bottle of water. But, William, I spent a good deal of time while you were gone discussing Zechariah chapter 6 and verse 13. And just as a super brief foundational statement, what I pointed out was, "Behold, a man that is called the branch. He shall sit as a king and as a priest in the temple of God, and he shall build the temple of God." And I pointed out that from a legal perspective, according to the law, a priest could never be a Davidic kingdom. A Davidic king was to be of the tribe of Judah. Likewise, a Davidic king could not be a priest because the priest had to be of the tribe of Levi or Aaron. So this looks like, on the surface of it, an impossibility according to the law. And so, how would it be possible for Christ, is the question that I posed. How would it be possible for Christ to be the fulfillment of this promise in Zechariah 6:13? And my answer to that was, and I'll let you, just hand this mic over to you while I go get a bottle of water. The answer to that is Christ is a priest after the order of Melchizedek. So I'll step away.
All right. Okay, well, we hope that Don will be okay. I know he's been challenged with his voice lately, and hopefully he'll return soon. But from Zechariah chapter 6, verses 12 and 13, of course, you do have the text that talks about the branch and the fact that he will build the temple of the Lord. And as Don was saying, you have the fact that one who was of the Davidic kingdom could not be a priest of the house of Aaron or Levi. And in addition to that, you also have the fact that he could not serve in that capacity. And so how does Christ fulfill the prophecy concerning building the temple of the Lord and being a priest on the throne? And from that perspective, we have the text that talks about the being a priest after the order of Melchizedek, who was both king and priest, Christ being, however, of the tribe of Judah. And so that presents a problem in terms of the text and what was allowed in Israel under the law, because the king could not be a priest and because he would have to be of the tribe of Levi. But according to Hebrews chapter 7, and of course, in fulfillment of the prophetic text from Psalm 110, verse 4, and many others, as that text is quoted many times in the New Testament, we find where the scripture talks about Christ becoming a priest after the order of Melchizedek, who was both king and priest. But in order for that to occur, according to Hebrews chapter 7, there had to be a change of the priesthood. And this change was evident as it related to Christ. The scripture points out in Hebrews 7 and verse 11 that the priesthood being changed, there was made of necessity a change also of the law. And in that context, the Bible talks about it being clear that Christ was of the tribe of Judah. And so if you're going to speak of another priest who was not after the order of Aaron, of course, this would be how Christ would be eligible to serve because of this. But Moses spoke nothing concerning Judah and the priesthood, and therefore this priesthood was changed. And so within that change, that transition from the old covenant priesthood, we have Christ entering into a priesthood as both king and priest, and that indicates that the priesthood had changed. It indicates that he's serving in a different realm, in a different sphere than they did under the old covenant, and therefore the priesthood being transferred to the tribe of Judah. I hear Dunn is back. I
yes.
Don't know if he's able to speak, but this is what is taking place, or what is being referred to in the book of Hebrews. And not only was it the fact that this was a change of the priesthood, it was a priesthood of a total different nature than that which existed prior to, in terms of the fact that we have a continual priesthood, a perpetual priesthood in Christ, because of the fact that he would continue forever, in that it wasn't transferred from one generation to the next in terms of the priesthood living and then dying, and thus having many priests. We only have one from that perspective. I don't want to get too far. I mean, Don, if you will just basically maybe set the direction, and then we can continue on, because I know that you had some thoughts and you had some ideas concerning it. One of the points that we got into a little bit on last week was the objection that's generally raised that you couldn't have two priesthoods at the same time. And, of course, this goes along the same line of, two covenants. To one degree, it's a similar argument to that. And the scripture that was raised, for if he were on earth, that's Hebrews 8:4, he would not be a priest, since there are priests who offer the gifts according to the law. So this is one of the passages that is generally raised. And, of course, I've raised it even myself from that perspective. But we were looking at the fact that there were several actions of Christ during his personal ministry indicated that he was operating within the realm of his priesthood. And, of course, when you're talking about his, not only the fact, as you were discussing before, about his removing sin or forgiving sin, etc., but you also have the fact of his offering himself on the cross as an act of his priesthood. And, of course, that's where the book of Hebrews begins in terms of Christ offering himself. And how else would he do that except as a priest? And so you have the priesthood of Christ indicated from that perspective. Don, did you want to jump in and say anything up to this point? Or?
No, I think you're doing a good job of summarizing some of the issues that are there. It's absolutely abundantly strange to me, and I pointed this out, at the beginning of the program, how the opponents of covenant eschatology, they make all of these arguments. And again, you and I have both made the argument of Hebrews chapter 8, verse 4 in discussions with premillennialists. And yet, I'll certainly speak for myself, I didn't realize the implications of what I was even arguing when I made that argument against dispensationalists. It's certainly true that Christ could not serve as a priest in the temple at Jerusalem according to the law, because he was of the tribe of Judah. Now, that's obviously true and valid. And as we pointed out last week on the program, dispensationalism says that, the Jerusalem temple will be restored, the Levitical priesthood will be restored, the sacrifices of the law will be restored. But then, of course, they like to turn around and say, well, it's not the law of Moses itself that's being restored. We won't go back over that territory again that we discussed last week, but it's really quite facetious and naive to say, just in summary of that issue, it's really quite naive to say that the law of Moses will not be restored, and yet every constituent element of the law of Moses is supposedly going to be restored. I mean, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, guess what it is? Well, it's not an aardvark. So the dispensational argument just simply will not work. But here's the issue. It's not a question of whether or not Christ was going to ever serve in the Jerusalem temple as a priest. That is simply not the issue. And this speaks so eloquently of the radically different nature of the priesthood of Christ and, by the way, of the nature of the temple, the Messianic temple, which has been our subject for, a good long while. And so after discussing Christ as the Melchizedek high priest, and how his priesthood is far superior to that of Levi and Aaron, even though, and the whole point that he tries to make in chapter 7 is that he knew, the writer of Hebrews is teaching, he knew that the Melchizedek priesthood was greater than the priesthood of Aaron and Levi. How did he know that? Well, because even while Aaron and Levi were in the loins of their father Abraham, Abraham paid tithes unto Melchizedek. Well, since it is axiomatic to say the lesser pays tithes to the greater, and Abraham gave tithes to Melchizedek, that means Melchizedek is greater than Abraham. Thus, Melchizedek is greater than the Aaronic priesthood. That's the whole issue. That's the whole point. So it raises the question, we go back to the question rather, how can you say there are two priesthoods operative at the same time? Well, it's quite simple. They're operating in two different realms, under two different laws. They're two totally different kinds of priesthood. The writer of Hebrews, chapter 8, verse 1, this is the main point, or as the King James says, this is the sum of that which we are saying. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the see, I think New King James is the throne of the majesty on high, a minister of the true tabernacle which God pitched and not man. Well, see, here is Zechariah chapter 6, verse 13. I mean, it's just right there. This is Zechariah 6:13. And notice he says, this is the true tabernacle. This is the real tabernacle. And I think it's G.K. Beale, if I'm not mistaken. But G.K. Beale points out that the word true here is not indicating that the first tabernacle was false, but rather he's pointing out that it was a type and a shadow. Well, Hebrews 9:24 teaches that. But Christ is the minister over the true tabernacle, and his ministry, his service as a priesthood is where? Well, he's seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. Now, let me point something out here, because this is very, very critical. In the Roman world in which Hebrews was written, and I want to make it very, very clear here, the words are not found. Okay, and I understand what I'm about to say. The actual literal, physical, not physical, but specific, explicit words are not found. But what we have in Hebrews chapter 8 is the motif of the absent master of Luke chapter 19, 11 and following. Now, in Luke 19, Jesus told a parable, and he told this parable because he was nigh unto Jerusalem, and because the Jews believed that the kingdom was going to come immediately. Greek word parakrema. Immediately, right then, right there, the moment he went into Jerusalem, they believed that the that the kingdom was going to come. And so Jesus said, a certain nobleman went into a far country there to receive a kingdom and to return. Well, here's what's important. This parable is based upon the actual real-life story. Herod the Great, his son or grandson properly, Archelaus. When Herod the Great died, Archelaus wanted to be given all of the territory that Herod had ruled over. So he goes to Jerusalem to implore Caesar to install him, Augustus Caesar, to install him on the throne. While he was there, the Jews sent an embassage to Rome to beg, to plead, to cajole, to bribe, whatever, Caesar not to install Archelaus as king. Why? Because he was known as a tyrant. He was ungodly. He was cruel. He was unjust. He was dishonest. He was greedy. He was avaricious. Choose your adjective. Well, this concept, see, and again, Jesus is telling this parable about the absent master, about the man going away to a far country. Well, here's the deal. Here's a little bit more of that background. Anytime a king, a client king, died in the ancient world, when their successor wanted to be appointed king, what would they do? Well, they didn't just get up and say, okay, I'm king now. And they didn't even raise an army and say, I'm really king now. No, that's not the way things were done in the Roman Empire. They went to Rome and they implored the emperor, because after all, if you're a client of, or if you're a province, a country even in the Roman Empire, and you're under the Roman authority, you absolutely do not appoint yourself king. You do not raise an army and say, I'm going to be king. No, you went to Rome and you implored the emperor to make you king. Now, the emperor may just simply be recognizing your lineage, your descendancy from a line of kings, and say, well, okay, sure, no problem, you're going to be king. But what happened is when you went to Rome and you made your case, if the emperor recognized your legitimacy, then a day came, you were coronated, and you were seated at the right hand of the emperor up on the dais, and you had huge fanfare. I mean, this was really an auspicious, incredible occasion. And so to be seated at the right hand was not to take a secondary position, although it has to be acknowledged you were not the emperor. Okay, you're subject to the emperor, but you're a king. And thus, in Acts chapter 2, when Peter said that God has raised up Christ, and seated him at his right hand in the heavens, fulfilling Psalms 110, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. That was enthronement language. It wasn't saying that one of these days Christ will be king. It was saying he is being recognized and enthroned. He is being coronated as king. And what happened in Rome when a man was coronated, recognized as king? Well, very often he gave gifts to his subjects. He bestowed riches here and there to show his magnanimity, to show his generosity, to show, at least ostensibly, what kind of ruler he was going to be. So, Peter, on the day of Pentecost, and look, folks, books have been written on Acts chapter 2 as a coronation scene of Jesus on the throne. I mean, some really good books down through the centuries have been written about this, bringing out the incredibly rich imagery that Peter is employing as he talks about Christ being raised from the dead, seated at the right hand of the majesty in the heavens, citing Psalms 110. And Peter says, he has made him, that's Christ, Jesus, both Lord and Christ. And it was based upon the fact that he had been declared to be, now watch this, Lord and Christ. In other words, he's not the Messiah, and to segue into our subject here, he is not a potential builder of the Messianic temple. He is the Messiah of the Messianic temple, that we might put it in this terminology, was right then being under construction. And seeing then that he has been made Lord in Christ, he has shed forth this which you now see and hear. Well, that once again is coronation, enthronement language. He's seated at the right hand. He is the king. And by the way, this is Luke 19. He is the absent master who went to the far country there to receive a kingdom. Acts chapter 2 is saying that Christ, the absent master, was now enthroned. He is receiving the kingdom. He is sending forth gifts to his citizens. And guess what? Back to Luke chapter 19. Citizens sent an ambassador saying, "We will not have this man to rule over us." Well, when the king returned, having been declared king, he gathered together those servants who rebelled against him. And what did he do? He killed them. Well, something really powerful there. You know, who was it that said and who rejected the kingship of Christ? I don't think it takes much of a Bible scholar to know who it was that rejected the offer of the kingdom. It was the Jews. They were the ones who said, even at his trial, we have no king but Caesar. They're rejecting Christ as their king. Now, obviously, he had not gone into the far country yet. And so it's, a tiny, tiny, tiny bit anachronistic, but not in the overall narrative. But again, the point of it is that Acts chapter 2 and Hebrews chapter 8 has that motif of the absent master who has been enthroned at the right hand of the majesty in the heavens, and he has been declared to be the minister of the true sanctuary. And that, all of this just, it's such a rich, powerful, and beautiful picture and harmonious picture with Zechariah chapter 6 of Christ, who is the king of the tribe of Judah, and he is the priest because he is the Melchizedekan priesthood. And by the way, what did Melchizedek mean? It meant king of righteousness, but also being translated, Hebrews chapter 7, king of Salem.
Peace.
Peace, I'm sorry. Salem being peace. So, yeah, Melchizedek is the priest, but he's the king. So this brings us right back to the issue, how in the world could there be two priesthoods going on at the same time? Well, it's because they're two totally different priesthoods, two totally different kinds of temples, two totally different kinds of sacrifices, two totally different kinds of systems and covenants. And so, William, and I'll speak for myself here, I was absolutely raised in that environment. There cannot be two systems in place at the same time. And the more I look at that and the more I think about that, the more I realize how ill-informed that argument truly is.
So when you are considering that, and of course, as you said, you have the text here in Hebrews chapter 8 saying that Christ was seated at the right hand as a high priest. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. And of course, that supports the text and fulfills the text in Zechariah 6 and verse 13. But in terms of the pushback that is often presented, that you can't have, two priests operating at the same time, what are some of the most common objections and responses that are made when evidence for the continuation of both priesthoods is expressed in, based on the New Testament?
Well, I can share with you, we were talking earlier in the program, we were talking about that anti-preterist Facebook page. It's been maybe 2 months ago, but there's a fellow on there. He's actually a lawyer, and I won't mention his name, but anyway, he got on there and somewhat arrogantly challenged me, and he said, Don Preston, why don't you just try to prove to us that Christ served as a priest while he was on earth, demonstrating that there are two priesthoods? And so I posted in response, it's obviously obvious that he was not serving as a Levitical priesthood. That is absolutely true. I grant that. I argue that. But he was a priest after the order of Melchizedek. Or are you going to argue that Christ was not serving in the capacity of a priest in any way whatsoever when he offered himself on the cross? Who was it that offered sacrifices? It was the priest. And this guy literally disappeared from the discussion. I asked him, was Christ serving as a priest when he offered himself as a sacrifice? Yes or no? That was the question. Well, if he was, then over there at the temple, you have the Levitical priesthood functioning according to the law. And you have Christ on the cross serving as a priest, offering himself as a sacrifice. So you have two priesthoods going on at that same time. And of course, I understand the argument is so commonly made. Well, Colossians chapter 2 says Christ nailed the law to the cross. But as you and I both know, it's an argument that dies hard because of people's presuppositions and people's prejudices. But the text does not say that it was the law that was nailed to the cross. Not at all. As a matter of fact, our good friend, Dr. Dallas Burdett, wrote, and by the way, folks, Dr. Burdett used to teach both Hebrew and Greek on the university level. So he's not your normal run-of-the-mill guy. But not long ago, I asked him if he would write a paper on Colossians 2:14-17, and addressing the question of what was it that was nailed to the cross. Now, look, I'm no Greek scholar, don't claim to be a Greek scholar, have never claimed to be a Greek scholar, but I can read the Greek scholars. And I'm very, very, very familiar with the fact that some of the greatest Greek scholars in all of the world are on record as saying that it was not the law, that Paul was not saying that it was the law that was nailed to the cross. The Greek term that is used, the handwriting of ordinances, that term, the handwriting of ordinances, is not a reference to the law itself. It is chirographon. And chirographon is a term directly out of the world of commerce, and we might express it like it's an IOU. I owe you X amount of dollars, or whatever that might be. If you owe me money, but you don't have the money to pay it at the moment, then you write out an IOU, and you give that. Well, that's the terminology in Colossians chapter 2. And so, as one scholar by the name of Losey, a recognized Greek scholar, and O'Brien, another recognized Greek scholar, all these men and more. And oh, by the way, Sam Frost is now on record saying it was not the law that was nailed to the cross. I couldn't believe what I was reading. So it's like, well, thank you very much. So anyway, what Paul was saying in Colossians chapter 2 is that the debt incurred through violation of the law was nailed to the cross. In other words, it's a way of saying their sins were forgiven, even though, as we understand it, the Holy Spirit had been given as a guarantee. And, of course, that's what Paul says in Ephesians chapter 1, 12 and 13, of the coming day of redemption. The day of redemption is the day of forgiveness. And so the point being that Colossians chapter 2, and no other passage, says that it was the law that was removed at the cross. It just doesn't say that. And so I asked Dr. Burdett to write an article. And, he knows my position. but I didn't ask him, write an article proving that I'm right. That is not the way I approached it. I approached it by asking him, do an exegesis of the passage, whatever it teaches. Tell us what it teaches linguistically, grammatically, textually, and contextually. And he wrote an absolutely fantastic article. It is on my website, donkpreston.com. I would suggest, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to read one of the finer articles that you're going to read, one of the finest pieces of exegesis on Colossians chapter 2, as to whether or not it was the law of Moses that was nailed to the cross, or whether it was the debt incurred through violation of the law of Moses that was nailed to the cross. You owe it to yourself to go there and in the search, in the search bar, just type in just type in Dallas Burdett. And he's been kind enough to write several articles for my website, but that article will come up very easily, and you'll be able to read it. Print it off. Spend time with it. It is truly, truly powerful. And on this aforementioned website, when they just simply repeat, the law was nailed to the cross, I just go over and I copy the URL and I paste it, and I'd say, I'm still waiting for one of you guys to answer this. Now, one young man who's so vitriolic, I posted that link no less than 6 times, and I said, are you ever going to read the article? And finally he answered, I don't believe him for a moment, but he finally said, I read the article and I think it's silly. I said, well, okay. Since you think it's silly, you ought to be able to point out why it's silly. So I said, write us an article refuting and answering the article. Well, that's been 3 weeks ago. He hasn't written a word. Another man on there who was raised in Greece, he likes to proudly proclaim that he knows Greek. Well, just because you were raised in Greece, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't mean you know Koine Greek. Those are worlds apart. Those are not the same thing. But anyway, he likes to brag about being raised in Greece. And I asked him after he repeatedly said the law was nailed to the cross. I said, I want to know, have you read the article? And he ignored it. I kept asking, and finally he said, I have read the article, and I think it's extremely weak. And I said, well, okay. That's fine. I said, why don't you write an article responding to it, and I will be more than happy to share it with Dr. Burdett. Well, that's been well over 2.5 weeks, and we still don't have an article. And that's typically what happens. All they can do is ridicule. Anybody can say, well, that's just silly, but it doesn't prove it's silly. Anybody can say that article is weak or it's crazy or it's wrong, but it doesn't prove that it's weak, it's crazy, or it's wrong. All you're doing is making a claim. I can get up and stand up and say, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? I saw Bigfoot walk across my front yard the other day. Really? Oh, where's your proof? Well, I'll prove that one day. No. Prove it to us. Well, I just said that he walked across my front yard. That's all the evidence you need. That's the way some of these people operate. And so when you challenge them to produce the evidence, the actual evidence, then all of a sudden they go silent. And that to me is about as revealing as it gets. When you have people who claim to be, quote, scholars, unquote, and they make claims about how ridiculous covenant eschatology is, and, William, you and I have heard this a million times, I could prove preterism false in 10 minutes or less. And yet years later, we're still waiting for them to do it. It really, really, really gets to be ludicrous in the extreme. So again, ladies and gentlemen, let me recommend that you go to my website and you check out that article by Dallas Burdett. You will find it's not mere verbiage. He quotes from some of the top Greek scholars, the lexicons, the grammars, the critical commentators, the best in the world. These are men who are not preterists by any stretch of the imagination. Not even close. And yet, even though they are not preterists, they don't have this, quote, axe to grind about the law, passing or not passing at the cross. They're simply commenting on the linguistics of the text, what kairograpon means, how it was used in the culture, in the society of Paul. And when they completely blow away the argument that Paul was saying that it was the law nailed to the cross, that's some pretty powerful stuff, or at least it is to me. So, pardon me. This brings us right back to the issue of two laws in effect, at the same time. And again, as I suggested last week, and I've still got a lot of study to do on this. It's such a fascinating subject, and yet there's some material out there. There's some evidence out there to suggest that from the moment of his incarnation, of the moment of he entered into his public ministry, Christ was considered to be a priest. He performed priestly functions. He used priestly language. He everything about his priestly ministry was priestly. And so, when he blessed people, when he cleansed people, when he forgave people, when he healed people, folks, all of those are priestly functions under the law even. And anyone would have recognized that in his actions, I say anyone would have recognized, it took some insight during his ministry. It took insight to realize who Jesus was. Because after all, he came to his own did not receive him. And it wasn't because the evidence wasn't there. It is because their eyes were closed. Their ears were closed. They were thinking so materially, so physically. They could not see the spiritual. And, William, just this afternoon on Facebook, before we came on the air, I was answering some questions from Michael Miano's, from some of their members about the possibility of a rapture, and I gave some reasons why I don't think the rapture is a viable biblical doctrine. Well, Ed Stevens wrote this very, very lengthy response to me, actually to the gentleman, which of course is ironic. He doesn't have time to write his, second affirmative presentation for our formal written debate, but he has time to get on Facebook and write really, really long posts trying to defend his rapture doctrine. So, doesn't have time to engage in the debate that he signed his name to, but he has time to get on Facebook and write really, really long articles. But I digress. And his argument was expectations demand a rapture. That was his whole point. That's been his point from the very beginning. But this brings us back to the issue of the temple and the priesthood, et cetera, et cetera. When you say that expectations demand a rapture, then we have every right in the world to say, well, okay, if they were expecting to be gathered, to be caught up with the air, then they were expecting the destruction, physical heaven and earth. They were expecting dead bodies to come out of the graves, in the ground, because after all, that's the language that's used. And furthermore, if they were expecting for themselves to be gathered, then they were expecting all the nations of the earth to be gathered as well. Well, I don't know of a single person who ascribes to the rapture doctrine who believes that they really believed and expected that kind of thing to happen. So expectations don't demand a rapture. And by the way, expectations do not demand a literal, physical, messianic temple. And with that, we're out of time. I managed to make it through Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us here on Two Guys in a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. And with that, I will say good night and God bless.
Well, thank you, Don. I don't know what was in the water you drank, but bring some more next week. That was absolutely wonderful. All right. Well, good night, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll see you on next week. God bless. Thank you for joining the Two Guys in a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Don Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day, and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.